Most people know that progressive overload is the main driver of muscle growth, i.e. if you lift more weights in the gym over time, you will get bigger and more muscular. But what's the case when you are cutting? Should you think about progressive overload then as well? Well, the short answer to this question is yes. You should always train for progressive overload, even when you are cutting. Now sure, you will likely not be able to build muscle and strength nearly as quickly when you are cutting, but if your intention is to do so, you will get better results than what you would if you were to take it softer on your training. In this video guys, I'll answer more in depth why progressive overload is important when cutting, why you should adopt something called the warrior mindset, and finally how you should set up your training and diet to easier allow for progressive overload during your cutting phase. So let's start by answering why striving for progressive overload is important when cutting. One of the most common statements I hear from people who have just started cutting is this: I'm going to start training lighter to feel the burn now that I'm cutting. This is a big mistake. Taking it easier on your training when you start cutting by starting to move away from progressive overload training is a bad idea. In fact, doing so will most likely lead to muscle loss. You see, when you are cutting, your body will only hold on to the tissue it deems is most necessary. This means that the signals you send your body via your muscle building training needs to be even stronger and clearer. When you take away the most important factor for growth, i.e. calories, you must provide your body with a big enough reason to still build muscle. Now, even though muscle growth will be reduced significantly and that at some point you will only be able to maintain your muscle mass when you are cutting, in order to get the best results possible, you should always train with the intention that you will achieve progressive overload. If you can do this, you will be able to hit occasional PRs even when cutting, which will leave you with a hard, ripped and aesthetic looking physique once your cut is over. To achieve this, you must adopt something called the warrior mindset. I first learned about the warrior mindset when I was going through Greg's warrior shredding program. And the warrior mindset is where you believe deep down that no matter what the circumstances are, you will still crush the obstacles coming your way. You see, when you're dialed in on the warrior mindset, you don't focus on the calorie deficit when you're stepping into the gym. No, you focus on the fact that you are going to crush the weights no matter what. This mindset has helped me countless of times to make PRs even though I'm cutting. And if you can make small PRs consistently, even how small they seem, over the span of like 8 to 12 weeks, you will be able to build decent amounts of muscle even though you are cutting. So forget about the fact that you are cutting and go into the gym with determination, guys. Let the warrior in you come out. In fact, be like Wolverine. Okay, so once you have adopted the warrior mindset, there are also a few training and dieting strategies that will help you more easily achieve progressive overload while you are cutting. But before we look at these training and dieting strategies, let's take a brief look at why it's possible to gain muscle when cutting by understanding what makes muscle grow in the first place. Even though the causes of muscle growth aren't completely understood yet, we do have about 90% of the picture. Brad Schoenfeld came out with a paper where he stated that the 3 causes of muscle growth are: 1. Progressive tension overload, which is lifting heavier weights over time. 2. Metabolic fatigue, which is pushing a muscle to its metabolic limit via the use of high reps. And then we have 3. Muscle damage, which is micro tears of muscle fibers that require recovery. Out of these 3, number 1, progressive tension overload has the most profound effect by far. So although you can stimulate growth through both metabolic fatigue and muscle damage, if you are not progressively lifting heavier and heavier weights, you are not going to grow very well. So let's bring cutting and being in a calorie deficit into the picture then. Here's the thing, muscle growth takes place in the same way when you are cutting as it does when you are eating at maintenance or when you are bulking. The only difference is that during a cutting phase, you have less nutrition available to allow the growth to take place. Nutrient availability is the reason you gain muscle faster during a bulk than during a cut, even when using the same workout routine. From the total amount of nutrients we eat, our bodies must get, number 1, the energy needed to maintain life, such as breathing, body temperature and pumping blood, etc. Then number 2, the energy expended during daily activities, which is any type of movement outside of training. Then number 3, the energy expended during training. Number 4, the nutrients necessary for recovery. And number 5, the nutrients necessary for growth. So as you might realize, it's difficult to cover all 5 points when consuming fewer calories than what your body burns. Usually by the time you get to number 4 or 5, you have used up all the available energy. This is the complete opposite of what happens when you are bulking. When you are in a calorie surplus, you are consistently eating enough calories to cover the the energy cost of living, exercise recovery, and muscle growth. With this said though, there are certain training and dieting strategies that we can use to allow for as much progressive overload as possible, even when we are in the cutting phase. So let's look at these strategies now, starting with training. To have the biggest chance of achieving progressive overload when cutting, you must train in a very effective and efficient way to produce as much stimulus for growth as possible, without overtaxing your body's ability to recover. You see, managing recovery is the most important task you have when cutting. If you're not able to recover, you won't make strength gains, which then won't lead to muscle growth. In fact, if you stay unable to recover for a longer time, you will start losing muscle. I cover more in depth how to train when cutting in one of my previous videos, but in short, here's what to do. Number 1, train 3 times per week. This is key. Using a training split that will have you train 3 times per week is going to give you the perfect balance between getting in enough training volume and frequency while still allowing for a great deal of recovery in between sessions. When it comes to achieving progressive overload when cutting, the thing that will make or break your physique will be your work to rest ratio. You see, training breaks down your muscles, which then forces your body to build the muscles up during your recovery time. If you train too much or too often while trying to gain strength and muscle while cutting, then your body will likely only be able to recover and not recover plus adapt. Okay, so number 2 is to train with compound exercises. Using compound lifts, especially when cutting, is an extremely effective way to provide a ton of stimulus to your muscles without having to do a ton of different exercises and sets. The less total work you can get away with while cutting, the bigger your chances will be to achieve progressive overload, and hence that build bigger muscles as well. Number 3, train in the 4 to 10 rep range. Using the 4 to 10 rep range has been shown to provide the most effective stimulus, i.e. high tensions on your muscles. By staying within this range, you will achieve more simply by doing less, especially if you use compound exercises as well. If you were to use a higher rep range than this, then you would drastically increase the recovery demands of your muscles, simply because the training volume increases a ton when doing higher reps. This would in all likelihood lead to a plateau in your pursuit of progressive overload. Number 4 is to take it easy on the cardio. Even though cardio can be great for increased calorie burn, it do so on the expense of recovery. Cardio will break down your musculature, which requires calories for recovery. What's negative about this is that cardio won't promote gains in strength and muscle growth, since it activates a completely different cellular pathway than strength training. So by doing cardio, you're essentially stealing energy that could go towards recovering your strength training instead. In other words, your progressive overload will slow down if you're doing too much cardio. For this reason, your calorie deficit should be determined by your diet and not your training. And with that said, let's look at how you should set up your diet. To be able to achieve progressive overload when cutting, here's what you should do with your diet. Number 1, use a moderate calorie deficit. The size of your calorie deficit is by far the biggest factor influencing your progress in the gym. If you're eating too little, you will reach a plateau in your lifting and then start declining fairly soon. If on the other hand you're eating too close to maintenance, then your results will be slow and cutting will simply become unnecessary. I think that for most people, a calorie deficit that is about 500 calories below maintenance is a good number to aim for on average. You could, however, use a more advanced strategy where you base your calorie deficit on your body fat percentage, as this will further ensure that you are not having a too large or too small calorie deficit. To learn about this, I recommend checking out my video called How to Set Up an Optimal Calorie Deficit after you're done watching this one. Number 2, have a moderate to high protein intake. When it comes to the diet, protein is the second most important factor beyond calories. A high protein intake has consistently been shown in research to help build muscle during a cutting phase. However, the protein intake has also been highly exaggerated in the fitness industry as a whole. It's not uncommon that people recommend that you eat 1.5 to 2 grams per pound or 3 to 4 grams per kg of body weight, which is simply just unnecessary and potentially even negative for strength gains. I have found that a protein intake of between 0.8 to 1 gram per pound or 1.8 to 2 grams per kg of body weight works best in increasing strength while cutting, as long as the calorie deficit isn't too big. The reason why this slightly lower protein intake works so well is because it leaves more room for carbs, which will drastically improve your training performance in the gym and then lead into better progressive overload. Number 3, eat enough vegetables. Eating enough vegetables is important when cutting. A wholesome nutrient-dense diet will lead to better micronutrient and fiber uptake. When you're cutting, you are taking in less total food, which means that it is harder to get all the vitamins, minerals and fibers that you need to feel and perform your best. Now, does this mean that you can't eat any junk or tasty stuff at all? Well, of course not. That wouldn't be very enjoyable, and I always promote a diet that is both sustainable and that you can adhere to, and having some enjoyable foods in your diet will help you with this. So just make sure that the majority of your food is coming from wholesome, nutrient-dense sources, and then allow yourself to eat some tasty stuff now and then as well. Striving for progressive overload when cutting is not only possible, it should also be your goal. Sure, as you are getting leaner, building strength while in a calorie deficit will be increasingly more difficult. But this doesn't mean that you should stop trying. If you adopt the mindset of a warrior, where you do your absolute best to gain strength each time you step into the gym, the better you will look once your cut is over. Further, making sure that you have a well set up training and dieting strategies is incredibly important for maximizing progressive overload when cutting. Thanks a lot for watching, guys, and make sure you hit the like button if you liked the video, and also subscribe and hit the bell, and I'll be seeing you next week. Bye.